Hello everybody. How you doing? I hope you're going well wherever you are. Morning, afternoon, evening, midnight, hours just before dawn, whatever it is, because I realise that all of us are living in different places, but through the wonderful magical powers of the internet, we can actually still do things together, which is fantastic. I love technology when it's working like that. I've got a favourite quote actually to do with technology. Douglas Adams, the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, apparently said people actually don't want technology, they just want stuff that works. And then he qualified it by saying, what is technology? If you need a manual, it's technology. So technically speaking, yeah, I actually just want stuff that works, but I'm very aware of the fact that thanks to the wonders of technology, we can actually engage in things like reading stories out loud and interact with each other, even if we're in different parts of the world, without it being super expensive phone calls or anything like that, which it used to be in the old days. Anyway, so what are we up to? We're reading Emily of New Moon. We're about 3/4 of the way through, I think. I'm not too sure. I should introduce myself to those of you who are new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand, also known as NZ. And I read old-fashioned children's stories because otherwise people don't actually find out about how it used to be for other people, and get their minds expanded, and books go missing because they're too old to be in the libraries. Lots of different reasons. One of the things I love about old-fashioned children's stories, when I say old-fashioned, I actually mean old children's stories, but I don't mean the children are old, I mean that the stories are old. Okay, that's why I tend to use the phrase old-fashioned. One of the reasons I like these old stories is because they help us to see a time and a place that's different to our own, which helps us to have a broader worldview, be a lot more appreciative of other people in other places and other time periods to ourselves, instead of assuming that everyone in the Victorian era was all uptight and super religious. If you actually read old stories, you will discover that there was a whole alternate lifestyle thing going on in certain sectors of society, a little bit hair raising or eyebrow raising or something like that, all that sort of stuff. If you go by the normal preconceived ideas, the people of the Middle Ages were filthy and didn't have a clue about germs or anything like that, and they died super young because they had no idea about health or medicine or anything like that, which is actually a load of bunkum. If you read a whole bunch of well-researched fiction, you will discover that a lot of, yes, people did die early, but not everybody died early. The incidence of people dying early was higher than it is now because of our current medical system, but that doesn't mean they didn't understand health and care for the body. It was just different to ours. So they didn't have vaccinations, they didn't have modern medicines and things like that. They did use plants, herbs, various other remedies which have been found to still be effective. In fact, the basis of a lot of our simple modern medicine, such as things like aspirin for headaches, came from herbal usage. Aspirin was derived from a key ingredient that comes from willow bark or willow trees, which was commonly used for dealing with certain types of pain. In fact, some of those things may well have less negative side effects if they're taken or used in their traditional old-fashioned form, because the one key ingredient that we use these days hasn't been isolated. It is supported by the other compounds that were in the plant, so therefore possibly prevented some issues from it. Doesn't mean that everything that is to do with plants is safe, because there are poisonous plants, and they were known to be poisonous even in the old days, if you want to use those terms. But there is so much we can learn from enjoying a decent story that is set in a different time period. And I don't necessarily mean ones that are modern stories set in old time periods. I mean actual books that were written a long time ago. They often show us how people thought of each other, thought of the world that they lived in at the time, because of the way they use language, the way they display attitudes towards different people and different sectors of society. Often authors were just your typical average ordinary person who had a stink attitude about some people that we would not consider acceptable, and we will actually read books that have that sort of attitude in them. Doesn't mean we agree with that aspect of the story and that person's belief, but we will also read books that an author will show for the time period they were writing in a very forward-thinking attitude towards other people. They will specifically address attitudes to people of different cultures and different genders to themselves in a way that is a lot more respectful than what we assume was acceptable at the time. So it just goes to show that society has always been very diverse. Attitudes have always been very diverse. People have never been just cookie-cutter versions of each other. We're human. We have all the foibles, and people used to as well. So as I'm about to start reading, I will give you 3 tips if you're new here. Make sure you have something to drink, make sure you have something to snack on, and make sure you have somewhere comfortable to sit. I've got water. Water is brilliant for keeping your brain and your body working well. Stay hydrated. You'll be able to do a lot more than what you otherwise would. Sorry. A snack is a good idea. It gives your mouth something to keep it occupied so that you can actually stay listening or focused on whatever it is that you're meant to be doing. Somewhere comfortable to sit makes it a lot more pleasant if you're going to be joining us for a while. Now, if you have to be studying or doing your work or doing house, which can include housework, whatever, while you're listening, I don't have a problem with that. You don't have to sit in a comfortable seat. There will not be a test after this reading to check to see that you were listening. If I provide some light entertainment while you're getting on with doing something else, all the better. That's fabulous. I'm glad that I can keep you company. Now, for those of you who can be focused on what's going on here because this is all you're doing at the moment, feel free to chat in the chat box, and I am currently talking to the people who are watching me live on Twitch. If you're on YouTube and you're just watching the recording, you're missing out. So come on over and join us. There will be you'll find the link for my Twitch channel on my YouTube profile. So if you are here on Twitch and I am reading live, you are most welcome to chat with me and with each other in the chat box, which is over here if you're looking at this on Twitch. I will, once I'm actually into reading the story, I will probably not specifically get involved in conversation that's going on in chat, but if there is something I've asked about, or if you've got something that is relevant for the story and you put that in the chat, if I happen to catch it in time, or if I ask you if you know about something and you look it up and put it into the chat, I will probably read that out while I'm actually reading the story, because it has relevance for the story itself. In terms of actually just chatting with you like I'm doing now, I tend to do that at the beginning and the end of my reading, but also if we have chapters where it's not just one chapter for the whole of the day's reading. If there are several chapters, I tend to chat in the chapter breaks. So with all that said, oh, and yes, if you want to lurk, that means just sort of staying quiet in the background, but you want me to know that you're lurking and are happy for me to say hi to you, then use the lurk command, which is !lurk, L-U-R-K. No capitals, no spaces. And the chat bot, which is the little thing that manages some of the background stuff, will actually acknowledge that you're here, and I will also see it and be able to say hi to you. So with all of that said, let's get on with reading the next chapter of Emily of New Moon. So here we go. Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery, famous for having written the Anne of Green Gables books. We are reading chapter 25. She couldn't have done it, is a quotation used as a chapter title. So what is it they're talking about? Let's find out. Great Aunt Nancy and Caroline Priest were wont to colour their grey days with the remembered crimsons of old long-past delights and merrymakings, but they went further than this and talked over any number of old family histories before Emily, in front of Emily, with total disregard of her youth. Oh, these two elderly ladies are not used to having a young person there that they have to be careful what they talk about in front of, because in those days you didn't talk about lots of things in front of young people because it was a corrupting effect that those things might have if they were thinking about them. Sorry, just having a mouthful of water. Yes, I'm happy. I now have a glass jar, which you can see through at the moment, and I have an angled top to my straw. The one that came with it was straight and it was a bit of a pain and it rattles around too much. And I've got a second one. This one's got funny pink unicorns on it and another one of those angled topped straws. So here we go. Sorry. We'll carry on with reading after I finish splashing myself. Yes, I do have my throat lozenges in case they're needed. So, inappropriate things? Well, we'll find out, won't we? Emily talked over any number of old family histories before Emily with a total disregard of her youth. Loves, births, deaths, scandals, tragedies, anything that came into their heads. Nor did they spare the details. Aunt Nancy revelled in details. She forgot nothing, and sins and weaknesses that death had covered and time shown mercy to were ruthlessly dragged out and dissected by this ghoulish old lady. The rest of the family have thought that she's rather odd, probably because she doesn't mind her tongue. She's no respecter of persons, if you want to use the phrase. Emily was not quite certain whether she really liked it or not. It was fascinating. It fed some dramatic hunger in her, but it made her feel unhappy somehow, as if something very ugly were concealed in the darkness of the pit they opened before her innocent eyes. As Aunt Laura had said, her youth protected her to some extent, but it could not save her from a dreadful understanding of the pitiful story of Ilse's mother on the afternoon when it seemed good to Aunt Nancy to resurrect that tale of anguish and shame. Ooh, we'll find out. Emily was curled up on the sofa in the back parlour reading the Scottish Chiefs because it was a breathlessly hot July afternoon, too hot to haunt the bay shore. Emily was feeling very happy. The wind woman was ruffling over the big maple grove behind the grange, turning the leaves until every tree seemed to be covered with strange pale silvery blossoms. Fragrances drifted in from the garden. The world was lovely. She had had a letter from Aunt Laura saying that one of Saucy Sal's kittens had been saved for her. Emily had felt, when Mike too had died, that she would never want another cat, but now she found she did. Everything suited her very well, and she was so happy that she should have sacrificed her dearest possession to the jealous gods if she had known anything about that old pagan belief. Aunt Nancy was tired of playing solitaire. She pushed the cards away and took up her knitting. "Emily," she said, "has your Aunt Laura any notion of marrying Dr. Burnley?" Emily, recalled thus abruptly from the field of Bannockburn, in the book that she was reading, looked bored. Blairwater gossip had often asked or hinted this question, and now it met her in Priest Pond. "No, I'm sure she hasn't," she said. "Why, Aunt Nancy, did Dr. Burnley hates women?" Aunt Nancy chuckled. "Thought perhaps he'd got over that. It's 11 years now since his wife ran away. Few men hold to one idea for anything like 11 years, but Alan Burnley always was stubborn in everything, love or hate. He still loves his wife, and that is why he hates her memory and all other women." "I never heard the rights of that story," said Caroline. "Who was his wife?" "Beatrice Mitchell, one of the Shrewsbury Mitchells. She was only 18 when Alan married her. He was 35. "Emily, never you be fool enough to marry a man much older than yourself." Emily said nothing. The Scottish chiefs was forgotten. Her fingertips were growing cold as they always did in excitement. Her eyes turning black, she felt that she was on the verge of solving the mystery that had so long worried and puzzled her. She was desperately afraid that Aunt Nancy would branch off to something else before she'd managed to find out what the rest of the story is. So frustrating. "I've heard she was a great beauty," said Caroline. Aunt Nancy sniffed. "Depends on your taste and style. Oh, she was pretty, one of your golden-haired dolls. She had a little birthmark over her left eyebrow, just like a tiny red heart. I never could see anything but that mark when I looked at her. But her flatterers told her it was a beauty spot. The Ace of Hearts, they called her. Alan was mad about her. She had been a flirt before her marriage, but I will say, for justice among women is a rare thing, Caroline, you, for instance, are an unjust old hag, that she didn't flirt after marrying. Openly, at least. She was a sly puss, always laughing and singing and dancing. No wife for Alan Burnley, if you ask me, and he could have had Laura Murray. But between a fool and a sensible woman, did any man ever hesitate? The fool wins every time, Caroline. That's why you never got a husband. You were too sensible. I got mine by pretending to be a fool. Emily, you remember that? You have brains. Hide them. Your ankles will do more for you than your brains ever will. Never mind Emily's ankles, said Caroline, keen on a scandal hunt. Go on about the Burnleys. Well, there was a cousin of hers, Leo Mitchell from Shrewsbury. You remember the Mitchells, don't you, Caroline? This Leo was a handsome fellow, a sea captain. He had been in love with Beatrice, so gossip ran. Some said Beatrice wanted him, but that her people made her marry Alan Burnley because he was the better match. Who knows? Gossip lies 9 times and tells a half-truth, the 10th. She pretended to be in love with Alan anyhow, and he believed it. When Leo came home from a voyage and found Beatrice married, he took it coolly enough, but he was always over at Blairwater. Beatrice had plenty of excuses. Leo was her cousin. They had been brought up together. They were like brother and sister. She was so lonesome in Blairwater after living in a town. He had no home except with a brother. Alan took it all down. He was so infatuated with her. She could have made him believe anything. She and Leo were always together there when Alan was away seeing his patients. Then came the night Leo's vessel, the Lady of Winds, was to sail from Blair Harbour for South America. He went, and my Lady Beatrice went with him. I'll get back to that in a moment. There's just one thing. This quote here. This is worth being quoted. I've heard similar before, but it's just the way it's phrased. Gossip lies 9 times and tells a half-truth the 10th. I'm going to write that one down. What about you? That one is worth remembering. Gossip lies 9 times and tells a half-truth the 10th. There you go. That's another one of my hints, is make sure you've got a pencil or pen and paper in case you like finding out about things. It's a good way to keep going. Anyway, we'll carry on. He went, and my Lady Beatrice went with him. A queer little strangled sound came from Emily's corner. If Aunt Nancy or Caroline had looked at her, they would have seen that the child was white as the dead, with wide, horror-filled eyes. But they did not look. They knitted and gossiped on, enjoying themselves hugely. "How did the doctor take it?" asked Caroline. Take it? Nobody knows. Everybody knows what kind of a man he's been ever since, though. He came home that night at dusk. The baby was asleep in its crib, and the servant girl was watching it. She told Alan that Mrs. Burnley had gone to the harbour with her cousin for a goodbye walk and would be back at 10. Alan waited for her easily enough. He never doubted her. But she didn't come back. She had never intended to come back. In the morning, the Lady of Winds was gone, and had sailed out of the harbour at dark the night before. Beatrice had gone on board with him. That was all anybody knew. Alan Burnley said nothing, beyond forbidding her name ever to be mentioned in his hearing again. But the Lady of Winds was lost with all on board off Hatteras, and that was the end of that elopement, and the end of Beatrice with her beauty and her laughter and her ace of hearts. But not the end of the shame and wretchedness she brought to her home, said Caroline shrewishly. I'd tar and feather such a woman. Nonsense, if a man can't look after his wife, if he blinds his own eyes. Mercy on us, child, what is the matter? For Emily was standing up, holding out her hands as if pushing some loathly thing from her. I don't believe it, she cried in a high, unnatural voice. I don't believe Ilse's mother did that. She didn't. She couldn't have. Not Ilse's mother. Catch her, Caroline, cried Aunt Nancy. But Emily, though the back parlour had whirled about her for a second, had recovered herself. Don't touch me, she cried passionately. Don't touch me. You liked hearing that story. She rushed out of the room. Aunt Nancy looked ashamed for a moment. For the first time, it occurred to her that her scandal-loving old tongue had done a black thing. Then she shrugged her shoulders. She can't go through life in cotton wool. Might as well learn spades are spades now as ever. I would have thought she'd have heard it all long ago, if Blairwater gossip is what it used to be. If she goes home and tells this, I'll have the indignant virgins of New Moon coming down on me in holy horror as a corrupter of youth. Caroline, don't you ask me to tell you any more family horrors before my niece, you scandalous old woman. At your age, I'm surprised at you. The two of them have been thoroughly enjoying gossiping together for so long that they've totally forgotten what it's like to have somebody else there with them. Oh, goodness gracious me. Oh dear, what's going to happen? We just have to keep on reading and find out, don't we? Oh, one day I'm going to have a setup where you don't hear me tapping away on my mouse or my keyboard instead of having it thumping away in your ears when I'm typing. Sorry about that. Anyway, we'll carry on. Aunt Nancy and Caroline returned to their knitting and their spicy reminiscences, and upstairs, because Emily has left the room, and upstairs in the pink room, Emily lay face downwards on her bed and cried for hours. It was so horrible. Ilse's mother had run away and left her little baby. To Emily, that was the awful thing, the strange, cruel, heartless thing that Ilse's mother had done. She could not bring herself to believe it. There was some mistake somewhere. There was. Perhaps she was kidnapped, said Emily, trying desperately to explain it. She just went on board to look around, and he weighed anchor and carried her off. She couldn't have gone away of her own accord and left her dear, dear little baby. The story haunted Emily in good earnest. She could think of nothing else for days. It took possession of her and worried and gnawed at her with an almost physical pain. She dreaded going back to New Moon and meeting Ilse with this consciousness of a dark secret which she must hide from her. Hide from Ilse, that she knows this. Sorry, I'm just going to check something. Carrying on. So she's worried about how it's going to affect Ilse, and I think she's realised that there's a possibility that it's also not just going to affect Ilse, it's actually going to affect her relationship with Ilse. That's not actually a bad thing to be concerned about, is it? It's actually quite a valid concern. Right, we are going to carry on. Yes, I am still here. I am still reading. Where do we get up to? Yes, I didn't say that before in the introduction, did I? I often get lost on the page. Thankfully this time it's because I've been actually thinking about several different things and chatting about the story. But sometimes when I'm actually reading a sentence, I would get lost in the middle of the sentence while I'm reading it out loud to you. I don't know why, it's just the way my brain works. But it makes for a fun time. So let's carry on reading and enjoy ourselves. So yes, I think she has, I don't know if she's realised that it may actually affect how she relates to Ilse. Anyway, we'll carry on. She dreaded going back to New Moon and meeting Ilse with this consciousness of a dark secret which she must hide from her. Ilse knew nothing. She had asked Ilse once where her mother was buried, and Ilse had said, "Oh, I don't know. At Shrewsbury, I guess. That's where all the Mitchells are buried." Emily wrung her slim hands together. She was as sensitive to ugliness and pain as she was to beauty and pleasure, and this thing was both hideous and agonizing. Yet she could not keep from thinking about it. All day and night, life at Wither Grange suddenly went stale. Aunt Nancy and Caroline all at once gave up talking family history, even harmless history, before her, and as it was painful repression for them, because that was how they kept themselves occupied, they did not encourage her hanging around. Emily began to feel that they were glad when she was out of hearing, so she kept away and spent most of her days wandering on the bay shore. She could not compose any poetry. She could not write in her Jimmy book. She could not even write to her father. Something seemed to hang between her and her old delights. There was a drop of poison in every cup. Even the flimsy shadows on the great bay, the charm of its fir-hung cliffs and its little purple islets that looked like outposts of fairyland, could not bring to her the old fine, careless rapture. She was afraid she could never be happy again. So intense had been her reaction to her first revelation of the world's sin and sorrow. And under it all persisted the same incredulity. Ilse's mother couldn't have done it, and the same helpless longing to prove she couldn't have done it. But how could it be proved? It couldn't. She had solved one mystery, but she had stumbled into a darker one, the reason why Beatrice Burnley had never come back on that summer twilight of long ago. For all the evidence of facts to the contrary notwithstanding, Emily persisted in her secret belief that whatever the reason was, it was not that she had gone away in the Lady of Winds, the sailing ship, when the doomed ship sailed out into the starlit wonder of the gulf beyond Blair Harbour. Oh, and that's the end of the chapter. What is going to happen next? Oh my goodness, such a shocking surprise. Ooh, is she going to be able to resolve it? So we've got a couple of things in the overall arch of the story that may eventually get resolved by the end of the book. I'm not sure if you remember the other one. The other one is something about that diamond from the ring. It was her grandmother or not grandmother, one of the greats had lost a stone out of a ring, a very expensive one. That straw is sealed too tightly, so it's not working very well. I have to use the other one. That's what happens when you have a straw that's slightly different size to the original. That's better. I got sick of having to tip the bottle up in front of the camera all the time and it looking really weird, and then the focus shifting because the camera was focusing on the bottle and then it would try and find me again and all that sort of stuff. So hence me using these cups with straws in. So anyway, we'll carry on, shall we? How about that? Oh, thank you, Cleo. It's so good to have you here, and I love actually being able to share them with everybody, the different stories that a lot of them, almost every story we've had so far has actually been a story that I've grown up reading myself. And so it's lovely to be able to have the opportunity to share them with everybody. It's one of the great delights in discovering that I could actually do this sort of thing. So hopefully we'll be able to keep on with stories. I haven't run out yet. Hopefully we're not going to. Hopefully there'll be books that keep going into public domain ahead of where I get up to with my reading. I'd rather read the interesting ones than the boring ones that are still available. I don't think I'm going to get to the end of finding them. It's more a matter of I may run out of ideas of what books to look for just because I can't remember other ones that I've read. I do know I've read a lot of books. Anyway, right, let's carry on. We are reading Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery, and we are now going to read chapter 26, which is On the Bay Shore. Now, in case you've forgotten, Emily of New Moon is set, like the Anne of Green Gables books, on Prince Edward Island, which is over on the east coast of Canada. It's, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. It's very much a place where people feel, if they've come from there, it's always part of them. In fact, the author herself, she moved away from there because she married and her husband had a job elsewhere in Canada. And yet most of what she wrote was based on Prince Edward Island long after she had left there. So it's one of those places that just gets under your skin and becomes part of you. The background behind me apparently is a photograph taken somewhere on Prince Edward Island, obviously a lot more recently than the book was written. I'm not too sure what it looked like. A very rural area. It's a big island, actually. But to a lot of people, it feels like it's small just because it's small communities, small like village-type communities. And I think in some ways it possibly has retained, apart from the fame because of the Anne stories, I think it's retained a lot more of that small-town rural feeling, which people appreciate when they go and visit it. So I don't think I've ever been to Prince Edward Island, but I'm not certain. I would have to ask my my children's great aunt, if one of the places we visited when I was over there seeing her when I was with my mother. Anyway, so we shall carry on. Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery, chapter 26, On the Bay Shore. I wonder, thought Emily, how much longer I have to live. Where did that come from? She had prowled that evening further down the bay shore than she had ever gone before. It was a warm, windy evening. The air was resinous and sweet, with the smell of the pine resin. That's what resinous means. The bay was a misty turquoise. That part of the shore whereon she found herself seemed as lonely and virgin as if no human foot had ever trodden it, save for a tiny, tricksy path, slender as a red thread, and bordered by great green velvety sheets of moss that wound in and out of the big firs and scrub spruces. The banks grew steeper and rockier as she went on, and finally the little path vanished altogether in a plot of bracken. Emily was just turning to go back when she caught sight of a magnificent spray of farewell summer growing far out on the edge of the bank. Now, obviously, farewell summer is the name of a plant, and you can try looking that up and see if you can find out what it is for me, because I don't know. I might need to look that one up myself if you don't find out for me. Farewell summer plant. Using my own notepaper. Growing far out on the edge of the bank. She must get it. She had never seen farewell summers of so dark and rich a purple. She stepped out to reach them. The treacherous, mossy soil gave way under her feet and slid down the steep slope. Emily made a frantic attempt to scramble back, but the harder she tried, the faster went the landslide, carrying her with it. In a moment it would pass the slope and go over the brink of the rocks, straight to the boulder-strewn shore 30 feet below. Emily had one dreadful moment of terror and despair. Then she found that the clump of mossy earth which had broken away had held on a narrow ledge of rock, half hanging over it, and she was lying on the clump. It seemed to her that the slightest movement on her part would send it over, straight to the cruel boulders beneath. She lay very still, trying to think, trying not to be afraid. She was far, far away from any house. Nobody could hear her if she screamed. And she did not even dare to scream, lest the motion of her body dislodge the fragment on which she lay. How long could she lie there motionless? Night was coming on. Aunt Nancy would grow anxious when the dark fell and would send Caroline to look for her, but Caroline would never find her here. Nobody would ever think of looking here for her, so far away from the Grange, in the spruce barrens of the lower bay. To lie there alone all night, to fancy the earth was slipping over, waiting for help that would never come, Emily could hardly restrain a shudder that might have been ruinous. She had faced death once before, or thought she had, on the night when Lofty John had told her she had eaten a poisoned apple. But this was even harder. To die here all alone, far away from home. They might never know what had become of her, never find her. The crows or the gulls would pick her eyes out. She dramatized the thing so vividly she almost screamed with the horror of it. She would just disappear from the world as Ilse's mother had disappeared. What had become of Ilse's mother? Even in her own desperate plight, Emily asked herself that question, and she would never see dear New Moon again, and Teddy, and the dairy, and the tansy patch, which is where Teddy lives, and Lofty John's bush, and the mossy old sundial, and her precious little heap of manuscripts on the sofa shelf in the garret. I must be very brave and patient, she thought. My only chance is to lie still, and I can pray in my mind. I'm sure God can hear thoughts as well as words. It is nice to think he can hear me if nobody else can. Oh God, Father's God, please work a miracle and save my life, because I don't think I'm fit to die yet. Excuse my not being on my knees. You can see that I can't move, and if I die, please don't let Aunt Elizabeth find my letter bills ever. Please let Aunt Laura find them, and please don't let Caroline move out the wardrobe when she house cleans, because then she would find my Jimmy book and read what I wrote about her. Please forgive all my sins, especially not being grateful enough and cutting a bang, and please don't let Father be very far away. Amen. Then, characteristically, she thought of a postscript. Oh, and please let somebody find out that Ilse's mother didn't do that. She lay very still. The light on the water began to turn warm gold and rose. A great pine on a bluff in front of her overflowed in a crest of dark boughs against the amber splendour behind it, a part of the beauty of the beautiful world that was slipping away from her. The chill of the evening Gulf breeze began to creep over her. Once a bit of earth broke off at her side and went down. Emily heard the thud of the little pebbles in it on the boulders below. The portion upon which one of her legs lay was quite loose and pendant also. She knew it might break off too at any moment. It would be very dreadful to be there when it got dark. She could see the big spray of farewell summer that had lured her to her doom, waving unplucked above her. Oh dear, the plant that had caused it all. Wonderfully purple and lovely. Then, beside it, she saw a man's face looking down at her. She heard him say, "My God," softly to himself. She saw that he was slight and that one shoulder was a trifle higher than the other. This must be Dean Priest, Jarback Priest. Emily dared not call to him. She lay still, and her great grey-purple eyes said, "Save me. How can I help you?" said Dean Priest hoarsely, as if to himself. "I cannot reach you. And it looks as if the slightest touch or jar would send that broken earth over the brink. I must go for a rope. And to leave you here alone like this, can you wait, child?" "Yes," breathed Emily. She smiled at him to encourage him, the little soft smile that began at the corners of her mouth and spread over her face. Dean Priest never forgot that smile, and the steadfast child eyes looking out through it from the little face that seemed so perilously near the brink. "I'll be as quick as I can," he said. "I can't go very fast. I'm a bit lame, you see, but don't be frightened. I'll save you. I'll leave my dog to keep you company. Here, Tweed." He whistled. A great tawny gold dog came in sight. "Sit right there, Tweed, till I come back. Don't stir a paw. Don't wag a tail. Talk to her only with your eyes." Tweed sat down obediently, and Dean Priest disappeared. Emily lay there and dramatised the whole incident for her Jimmy book. She was a little frightened still, but not too frightened to see herself writing it all out the next day. It would be quite a thrilling bit. She liked to know the big dog was there. She was not so learned in lore of dogs as in lore of cats, but he looked very human and trusty, watching her with great kindly eyes. A grey kitten was an adorable thing, but a grey kitten would not have sat there and encouraged her. "I believe," thought Emily, "that a dog is better than a cat when you're in trouble." It was half an hour before Dean Priest returned. "Thank God you haven't gone over," he muttered. "I hadn't to go as far as I feared. I found a rope in an empty boat up shore and took it. And now, if I drop the rope down to you, are you strong enough to hold it while the earth goes, and then hang on while I pull you up?" "I'll try," said Emily. Dean Priest knotted a loop at the end and slid it down to her. Then he wound the rope round the trunk of a heavy fir tree. "Now," he said. Emily said inwardly, "Dear God, please," and caught the swaying loop. The next moment the full weight of her body swung from it, for at her first movement the broken soil beneath her slipped over. Dean Priest sickened and shivered. Could she cling to the rope while he drew her up? Then he saw she had got a little knee hold on the narrow shelf. Carefully he drew on the rope. Emily, full of pluck, helped him by digging her toes into the crumbling bank. In a moment she was within his reach. He grasped her arms and pulled her up beside him into safety. As he lifted her past the farewell summer, Emily reached out her hand and broke off the spray. "I've got it anyhow," she said jubilantly. Then she remembered her manners. "I'm much obliged to you. You saved my life. And I think I'll sit down a moment. My legs feel funny and trembly." Emily sat down all at once, more shaky than she had been through all the danger. Dean Priest leaned against the gnarled old fir. He seemed trembly too. He wiped his forehead with his handkerchief. Emily looked curiously at him. Sorry, that's my chair making noise because I'm trying to get comfortable because it was sitting here for a fair bit of time. Sorry. He seemed trembly too. He wiped his forehead with his handkerchief. Emily looked curiously at him. She had learned a good deal about him from Aunt Nancy's casual remarks. For Aunt Nancy did not wholly like him, it seemed. She always called him Jarback, rather contemptuously, while Caroline scrupulously called him Dean. Now, Caroline is a priest. Aunt Nancy married into the priest family. So there you go. Sorry, just a word I want to check. I would guess that that's partly why, is because of the family connection. Right. Trying to find where I got to. While Caroline scrupulously called him Dean, Emily knew he had been to college, that he was 36 years old, which to Emily seemed a venerable age, and well off, that he had a malformed shoulder and limped slightly, that he cared for nothing save books, nor ever had, that he lived with an older brother and travelled a great deal, and that the whole priest clan stood somewhat in awe of his ironic ironic tongue. Aunt Nancy had called him a cynic. Emily did not know what a cynic was, but it sounded interesting. She looked him over carefully and saw he had delicate pale features and tawny brown hair. His lips were thin and sensitive, with a whimsical curve. She liked his mouth. Had she been older, she would have known why, because it connoted strength and tenderness and humour. In spite of his twisted shoulder, there was about him a certain aloof dignity of presence, which was characteristic of many of the priests, and which was often mistaken for pride. The green priest eyes that were peering and uncanny in Caroline's face, and impudent in Jim Priest's, were remarkably dreamy and attractive in his. "Well, do you think me handsome?" he said, sitting down on another stone and smiling at her. His voice was beautiful, musical and caressing. Emily blushed. She knew staring was not etiquette, and she did not think him at all handsome, so she was very thankful that he did not press his question, but asked another. "Do you know who your nightly rescuer is? I think you must be Mr. Dean Priest." Emily flushed again with vexation. She had come so near to making another terrible hole in her manners. "Yes, Jarback Priest. You needn't mind the nickname. I've heard it often enough. It's a priest idea of humour." He laughed rather unpleasantly. "The reason for it is obvious enough, isn't it? I never got anything else at school. How came you to slide over the cliff?" "I wanted this," said Emily, waving her farewell summer. "And you have it. Do you always get what you go after, even with death slipping a thin wedge between? I think you're born lucky. I see the signs. If that big aster lured you into danger, it saved you as well, for it was through stepping over to investigate it that I saw you. Its size and colour caught my eye. Otherwise I should have gone on, and you, what would have become of you? Whom do you belong to that you are let risk your life on these dangerous banks? What is your name? Do you have a name? I begin to doubt you. I see you have pointed ears. Have I been tricked into meddling with fairies? And will I discover presently that 20 years have passed, and that I am an old man long since lost to the living world, with nothing but the skeleton of my dog for company? I am Emily Bird Star of New Moon," said Emily rather coldly. She was beginning to be sensitive about her ears. Father Cassidy had remarked on them, and now Jarback Priest. Was there really something uncanny about them? And yet there was a flavour about the said Jarback that she liked decidedly. Emily never was long in doubt of anyone she met. In a few minutes she always knew whether she liked, disliked, or was indifferent to them. She had a queer feeling that she had known Jarback Priest for years, perhaps because it had seemed so long when she was lying on that crumbling earth waiting for him to return. He was not handsome, but she liked that lean, clever face of his with its magnetic green eyes. "So you're the young lady visitor at the Grange," said Dean Priest in some astonishment. "Then my dear Aunt Nancy should look after you better. My very dear Aunt Nancy." "You don't like Aunt Nancy, I see," said Emily coolly. "What is the use of liking a lady who won't like me? You have probably discovered by this time that my lady aunt detests me." "Oh, I don't think it's as bad as that," said Emily. "She must have some good opinions about you. She says you're the only priest who will ever go to heaven." "She doesn't mean that as a compliment. Whatever you in your innocence believe it to be. And you are Douglas Starr's daughter? I knew your father. We were boys together at Queen's Academy. We drifted apart when we left it. He went into journalism, I to McGill, which is another university. But he was the only friend I had at school, the only boy who would bother himself about Jarback Priest, who was lame and hunchbacked and couldn't play football or hockey. Emily Bird Starr. Star should be your first name. You look like a star. You have a radiant sort of personality shining through you. Your proper habitat should be the evening sky just after sunset, or the morning sky just before sunrise. Yes, you'd be more at home in the morning, Sky. I think I shall call you Star. Do you mean that you think me pretty? Asked Emily directly. Why, it hadn't occurred to me to wonder whether you were pretty or not. Do you think a star should be pretty? Emily reflected. No, she said finally, the word doesn't suit a star. I perceive you are an artist in words. Of course it doesn't. Stars are prismatic, palpitating, elusive. It is not often we find one made flesh and blood. I think I'll wait for you. Oh, I'm ready to go now, said Emily, standing up. That wasn't what I meant. Never mind. Come along, Star, if you don't mind walking a bit slowly. I'll take you back from the wilderness at least. I don't know that I'll venture to Wither Grange tonight. I don't want Aunt Nancy to take the edge off you. And so you don't think me handsome? I didn't say so, said Emily. Not in words, but I can read your thoughts, Star. It won't ever do to think anything you don't want me to know. The gods gave me that gift when they kept back everything else I wanted. You don't think me handsome, but you think me nice. Do you think you are pretty yourself? A little. Since Aunt Nancy lets me wear my bang, said Emily frankly. Jarback Priest made a grimace. Don't call it by such a name. It's a worse name even than bustle. Bangs and bustles. They hurt me. I like that black wave breaking on your white brows. But don't call it a bang ever again. It is a very ugly word. I never use it in my poetry, of course. I have to say, I thought the same about the term bang or bangs for a fringe. I would rather call it a fringe. Yes, Jonathan, a very intense piece of story, that particular one. I had a very strong impression of it, but no specific memory of what happened. I mean, apart from knowing that she was going to get out of it because the story hadn't ended yet. Rather intense, though. Anyway, we'll carry on with reading. It is a very ugly word. I never use it in my poetry, of course, whereby Dean Priest discovered that Emily wrote poetry. He also discovered pretty nearly everything else about her in that charming walk back to Priest Pond in the fur-scented dusk, with Tweed walking between them, his nose touching his master's hand softly every now and then, while the robins in the trees above them whistled blithely in the afterlight. With 9 out of 10 people, Emily was secretive and reserved, but Dean Priest was sealed of her tribe, and she divined it instantly. And he had a right to the inner sanctuary, and she yielded it unquestioningly. She talked to him freely. Besides, she felt alive again. She felt the wonderful thrill of living again after that dreadful space when she had seemed to hang between life and death. She felt, as she wrote to her father afterwards, as if a little bird was singing in my heart. And oh, how good the green sod felt under her feet. She told him all about herself and her doings and beings. Only one thing she did not tell him, her worry over Ilse's mother. That she could not speak of to anyone. Aunt Nancy need not have been frightened that she would carry tales to New Moon. I wrote a whole poem yesterday when it rained and I couldn't get out, she said. It began, I sit by the western window that looks on Malvern Bay. Am I not to hear the whole of it? Asked Dean, who knew perfectly well that Emily was hoping that he would ask it. Emily delightedly repeated the whole poem. When she came to the 2 lines she liked best in it, perhaps in those wooded islands that gem the proud bay's breast. She looked up sideways at him to see if he admired them, but he was walking with eyes cast down and an absent expression on his face. She felt a little disappointed. He said when she had finished. You're 12, didn't you say? When you're 10 years older, I shouldn't wonder. But let's not think of it. Father Cassidy told me to keep on, cried Emily. There was no need of it. You would keep on anyhow. You have the itch for writing born in you. It is quite incurable. What are you going to do with it? I think I shall either be a great poetess or a distinguished novelist, said Emily reflectively. Having only to choose, remarked Dean dryly. Better be a novelist. I hear it pays better. What worries me about writing novels, confided Emily, is the love talk in them. I'm sure I'll never be able to write it. I've tried, she concluded candidly, and I can't think of anything to say. Don't worry about that. I'll teach you some day, said Dean. Will you? Will you really? Emily was very eager. I'll be so obliged if you will. I think I could manage everything else very nicely. It's a bargain then. Don't forget it. And don't go looking for another teacher, mind. What do you find to do at the Grange besides writing poetry? Are you never lonesome with only those 2 old survivals? No, I enjoy my own company, said Emily gravely. You would. Stars are said to dwell apart, anyhow, sufficient unto themselves, ensphered in their own light. Do you really like Aunt Nancy? Yes, indeed. She is very kind to me. She doesn't make me wear sunbonnets, and she lets me go barefooted on in the forenoons, in the early part of the day. But I have to wear my buttoned boots in the afternoons, and I hate buttoned boots. Naturally, you should be shod with sandals of moonshine, and wear a scarf of sea mist with a few fireflies caught in it over your hair. Star, you don't look like your father, but you suggest him in several ways. Do you look like your mother? I never saw her. All at once Emily smiled demurely. A real sense of humour was born in her at that moment. Never again was she to feel quite so unmixedly tragic over anything. No, she said, it's only my eyelashes and smile that are like mother's, but I've got father's forehead and Grandma Star's hair and eyes and great Uncle George's nose and Aunt Nancy's hands and cousin Susan's elbows and great-great-grandmother Murray's ankles and grandfather Murray's eyebrows. Because that's what they've all been telling her. Well, talking about her. Dean Priest laughed. A rag bag, as we all are, he said, but your soul is your own and fire new. I'll swear to that. Oh, I'm so glad I like you, said Emily impulsively. It would be hateful to think anyone I didn't like had saved my life. I don't mind your saving it a bit. That's good, because you see, your life belongs to me, henceforth. Since I saved it, it's mine. Never forget that. Emily felt an odd sensation of rebellion. She didn't fancy the idea of her life belonging to anybody but herself, not even to anybody she liked as much as she liked Dean Priest. Dean, watching her, saw it and smiled his whimsical smile that always seemed to have so much more in it than mere smiling. That doesn't quite suit you? Ah, you see, one pays a penalty when one reaches out for something beyond the ordinary. One pays for it in bondage of some kind or another. Take your wonderful Astor home and keep it as long as you can. It has cost you your freedom. He was laughing. He was only joking, of course, yet Emily felt as if a cobweb fetter had suddenly been flung around her. Yielding to a sudden impulse, she flung the big Astor on the ground and set her foot on it. Fetter, bindings, sorry. Dean Priest looked on amusedly. His strange eyes were very kindly as he met hers. You rare thing, you vivid thing, you starry thing, we are going to be good friends. We are good friends. I'm coming up to Wither Grange tomorrow to see those descriptions you've written of Caroline and my venerable aunt in your Jimmy book. I feel sure they're delicious. Here's your path. Don't go roaming again so far from civilization. Good night, my star of the morning. He stood at the crossroad and watched her out of sight. What a child, he muttered. I'll never forget her eyes as she lay there on the edge of death, the dauntless little soul, and I've never seen a creature who seemed so full of sheer joy in existence. She is Douglas Starr's child. He never called me Jarback. He stooped and picked up the broken Astor. Emily's heel had met it squarely, and it was badly crushed, but he put it away that night between the leaves of an old volume of Jane Eyre, where he had marked a verse. All glorious rose upon my sight, that child of shower and gleam. That's the piece of poetry he put it with. And that is the end of that chapter and today's reading. So gotta have something for you to come back for more of. Oh, goodness me. So she's meeting yet more new people. We keep on meeting new people in this book. People who feel like they're going to be an ongoing part of her story. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen there. He definitely finds her very intriguing. There's something about her which is not like most of the people he knows, and he appreciates that. But she's only 12. We'll see what happens. Anyway, and keeping in mind, Emily is very much an independent-minded person. She likes to be in charge of herself, and that is a lot of the trouble that she has with her Aunt Elizabeth, isn't it? If you think about it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as to why she has trouble with it. Anyway, next time we will be reading The Vow of Emily, which is chapter 27. Sorry, like I've said before, I'm fluent at reading Roman numerals in my head, but for some reason getting the words out of my mouth, I get them wrong every time. So chapter 27, The Vow of Emily, is what we'll be starting with next time. And I hope that you have a wonderful week or time between now and then. I look forward to seeing you next time when I'm reading. And thank you so much for being here and being part of the read through. It's great having people to read to. I really, really enjoy it. Thank you. It's lovely having you both here, Jonathan and Cleo. That's fabulous. And anyone else who's here as well. Just a quick roundup of additional information for those who are not used to it, who are fairly new here. I read 3 days a week on Twitch, Monday, Wednesday and Friday, 3 p.m. New Zealand time. And if you go to my Twitch profile page, my Twitch channel, actually on my schedule, which probably has the wrong book written in there, it will show you the time that I am reading in your time zone. So you won't even have to go and look it up using Mr. Google. So I read here and then I save the recordings. 2 weeks later, they are taken offline on Twitch, and so I put them up over on YouTube and put them into playlists so people can listen to one whole book without having to search for the rest of the parts of the story. So if you've missed any particular stories or sections of a story, yes, you'll have to wait 2 weeks until they show up over there, but never fear, you will still actually get to hear the rest of the story. There's all sorts of other stories that I have read previously over on my YouTube channel. I'll give you a link for it. So if you go over to my YouTube channel, there's a playlist page. There is also just the general videos page. I have read, I won't remember them all, but I'm going to give it a try to see how many I can do. Millie Molly Mandy, that's where I started. Sorry, just a quick mouthful of water. Millie Molly Mandy, much younger age group that book was for. Loved the stories when I was growing up, loved them as an adult, reading them to my children. So it was wonderful to be able to read them to everybody in our first lockdown for COVID. That was when I started, and I was just using my phone. I was just holding it up with my hands, so it's a bit shaky, it's not very clear, the sound isn't great, but I've got them. Anyway, so Millie Molly Mandy, The Wind in the Willows, Alice in Wonderland, Through the Looking Glass, The Secret Garden, A Little Princess, two George MacDonald books, which are The Princess and the Goblin, and then The Princess and Curdie. What else? There's a bunch of William stories, Just William, and another one that follows on from that, written by Richmond Compton. a bit of a mischief maker without him intending to be, because he takes adults literally with what they say, and that gets him into trouble. Lots of fun though. Several different book series by Edith Nesbit. So there's the Would Be Goods and the Treasure Seekers, and New Treasure Seekers was one series, and I put them in the wrong order. That's the Bastable series, the Bastable Children. There's also the Samoyed series, which we have read two of the three books. That's the one about the Sand Fairy and a different group of children, also written by the same author. Somehow or other, we tend to get a lot of mischief happening in the various stories that we read. Most of the stories we read, not so much with Emily, although she does get into trouble for different reasons, but no, not quite the same extent of mischief making. I'm sure there are others. I can't remember them. There's a whole lot, but they're all old children's stories. And I will continue reading old children's stories while I can still find them to be able to read to you, because it's so much fun to either rediscover ones I've read before or discover new ones. So come back next time for more from Emily of New Moon. I'm not quite sure. I'll just have a quick look and see how far through we are. We've got 5 more chapters to go, so that's probably 3 days worth of reading, depending on how long they are. I'm not quite sure. If it's a particularly long chapter, it'll just be one chapter for the day. If it's a short one, it'll be more than one. Anyway, so once again, lovely to have you here. Thank you for being here. I really enjoy having you enjoy the stories with me, and I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.